Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir, goedenavond. A warm welcome to you all in Passa Porta, International House of Literature in Brussels. One of Passa Porta's aims is to build an environment where writers from many different backgrounds can find a space to create, to get inspired, to get challenged, not only on stage, but also for longer periods in our writers' flat in the center of Brussels. We are very pleased to be able to host Nir Baram as our writer-in-residence this month, offering him time to work on his new novel and wander through the city. Nir Baram, considered one of the most talented Israeli writers of his generation, is the author of 5 novels, including Good People and World Shadow, all translated into many different languages. Tonight, he will present his latest book, a reportage of his journey around Israel and the West Bank, in which he puts forward voices that are not normally heard, and doing so paints a complex political and social picture. The book has recently been published into Dutch as Land zonder Grenzen by De Bezige Bij, in a translation of Sylvie Hoyink, and will be published in English next year. Tonight, Nir Baram will be interviewed by and talk with Dutch writer Arnon Grunberg, known for many novels such as De Asielzoeker, De Man zonder Ziekte, and recently Moedervlekken. They have met each other some time ago in Amsterdam and will continue their conversation here with us. At the end, there will also be some time for questions from you, the audience. Nir Baram's books will be for sale after the event, and he will be happy to sign them. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Nir and Arnon, I wish you all a very inspiring evening.
Anna, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, Leonard Cohen died. Trump won the election, at least the Electoral College, but don't give in to the temptation of despair because Nir Baram is still alive. And what we are going to do tonight, at least that's what I try to do with you, Nir, is to solve the problem of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict within 45 or 50 minutes. If we can do this, of course, we will win the Nobel Peace Prize. But Nir, I'll tell you already before this, I leave the Nobel Peace Prize completely to you.
Just give me the money, you can take the prize.
That's almost an anti-Semitic answer, but okay. Afterwards, I will open the discussion to the public. You can ask all the questions you want, but I'll be severe. I don't accept any statements or monologues. I think any person with a moderate intelligence can ask a question within 60 seconds. So that's what you're supposed to do. Nir, we are going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you not tonight about your novels, but about your collection of essays, reportages. On your blog, it's called in English, In a Land Beyond the Mountains. I think the official title is In a Land Without Borders. What I want to do is walk through the book based on some quotes I selected. Unfortunately, the English translation has not been available yet, so I will read the quote in Dutch, and then I will do my best to translate it as accurately as possible in English. That's okay with you?
Yes.
And you have been introduced before, so I don't have to mention the novels, the awards, and all the other things you won. In a way, I mean, all these essays, all these reportages have been published in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz before. That's correct, yes?
Some of them.
Some of them.
Not everything.
And when you started to do this, you knew from the beginning that this was going to be a book, or?
No.
No.
No, it was a project that I was talking about with Haaretz for some time, and then I started to write it. And basically, in the beginning, the problem was that I didn't know how to do it. It's not just that you just go out to Balata refugee camp and stand in the middle of the camp and say, "Oh, I'm an Israeli journalist, let's talk." It needs some preparations. So it advanced step by step. And Haaretz did help me in some points. But only when I started really to write the chapters, I understood that it might be a book. Because in the beginning, I just traveled the West Bank and East Jerusalem for 10 months. Wrote in my notebooks. I had like 10 or 12 notebooks that I wrote everything that I saw. I didn't write anything on the computer. I didn't try to develop chapters because I didn't have the understanding of what is the big picture of the conflict that I see. Mm-hmm. It took me some time to understand.
And also because you mentioned language often, Hebrew and Arabic, did you work with a translator or an interpreter, or did you do Did you work with a fixer, or did you go there alone all the time?
Sometimes I went alone, sometimes with the fixer, sometimes with the translator. It depended in the project and where did I go. Many Palestinians still talk Hebrew, especially from the older generations. Let's say if you're Palestinians and you're over 40, there is a good chance you will know Hebrew. Not necessarily you will want to talk Hebrew, but you will know Hebrew. The young generation of the Palestinian usually don't know Hebrew, like the young generation of the Israelis, they don't know Arabic.
And are you able to have a conversation in Arabic? Or
No, actually, it's very funny. I think that my story can show the conflict in a very interesting way, because 3 of my grandfathers and grandmothers talk Arabic as first language. They came from Khaleb, from Aden. One of them came from a Spanish family. So my grandmother, when she came to Israel from Beirut, she talked only Arabic. But nobody in my generation in high school or my generation knew Arabic. The only person that knew Arabic is the people that learn Arabic in high school in order to go to the IDF, to the intelligence community. So I didn't learn Arabic in high school, but I did try to learn it I'm trying to learn it in the last 3 years, but I'm extremely slow, also because I have a baby. Secondly, because I'm
That's
slow.
a good excuse always.
I'm slow with languages in general,
Okay.
but in the last now I can have a certain understanding, but not to conduct.
And you're still taking lessons?
Yes, I still.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, you mentioned the book, the famous book by David Grossman, who wrote a book about the territories in the 80s. In Dutch, the title is, I believe, Over the Grens. I think the English title is The Yellow Wind. Was this like, did you start this project as a way of writing a sequel to this book by Grossman?
Well, not exactly. Grossman's book was very interesting, but it was 30 years ago and came from in a totally different time and totally different landscape and totally different phase of the conflict. When Grossman wrote his book, there was this understanding in Israel that the occupation is a route that we took, like a huge mistake that we did. And in some point in history, we will come back to the main road of Zionism and will be the people that we should be. So so still in Grossman time, there was this belief that the occupation doesn't represent who we really are. It's a diversion. And I think that in my book, it's totally normalized. Also, I think that Grossman did a remarkable job in his book linguistically, but I don't think that he talked to really many Palestinians. And I think that the main difference that Grossman in his book talked all the time, like gave his opinion and argue and gave his moral lesson. I didn't do it. I felt that my position in the book as a narrator is to listen and to ask questions, but not to create this moral outrage all the time, because I think it doesn't really allow the reader to judge by himself. And what's more important than to create this moral outrage is to show what's really going on. And I think that when you're trying to be more calm and not interfere all the time, it makes people read the book in a different way.
It's an interesting remark you made about that Grossman's book still believes that the occupation of the territories is not the essence of Zionism or of Israel, because already in the beginning in your preface you basically write something that's quite filled with despair. I will first read it in Dutch and then try to come up with a translation. De meeste Israëli's en misschien ook de meeste mensen in de wereld zijn tot de slotsom gekomen dat er geen kans bestaat om het conflict op te lossen. So you write, most Israelis and even most people in the world have reached the conclusion that there's no way of finding a solution for the conflict. That's how you start the book. It's
obvious.
It's obvious.
Yeah.
You don't want to comment on it. It's so obvious that, I mean, but it's not obvious, because if this is what you think, then you could have finished your book with after this preface. There was no need to write a book.
I should have thought about it when I was. Why didn't you tell me it in our last meeting? But no, this is a statement that it's objectively true, if there is such thing as objectively true. But I think that, look, my quest was to find underneath the land almost the opportunities, the ideas, the new initiatives, some kind of hope, totally new approach to the occupation. So it was part of the book. The book wasn't just to show what's going on in the territories and the way that the occupation functions, even though I did it because it's inevitable, that basically Israel created in the West Bank a kind of, let's say, to be fair to say, a big prison in the West Bank. That what was really striking for me talking to Palestinian more than anything is to understand how the lack of freedom of movement is something that any Palestinian feel, and it means that you can't really plan your day like we do, like everyone does around the world, because in every turn that you make, you can be stopped in a blockade, and then you don't know if you will pass, the soldier will not let you pass. So anything they plan on a daily basis is always questionable. And I think this was the most striking thing, that Palestinians talk to me more about freedom of movement than anything else, much more than Palestinian state and all the agreements, is the ability to move in their land in the West Bank, but also move to Israel and move to Gaza, because it's part of their land, in the consciousness. Because for the Palestinians, I think that most of them, the Green Line is not really important, because they never really experienced the Green Line as part of Palestine before 48. So it's not essential for them to bring back the Green Line. They just want to move freely.
That's also something you said in an interview in NRC Handelsblad, a Dutch newspaper, in 2016, this year also. You said, again, I read in Dutch, de groene lijn, zegt hij, wordt vooral in Amsterdam, in Berlijn, in de Frankfurter Allgemeine zeer gerespecteerd, maar ze bestaat niet. De Green Line has been respected, is respected in Berlin, in German newspapers, but this line doesn't exist.
Look, I came in the last few months, I came really to some kind of frustration from the European view of the conflict. I think that they have huge lack of knowledge. They don't know anything about the conflict really. They don't know how the situation in the West Bank really is. They don't know where the settlers, they didn't meet any settlers. In the review in the Frankfurter Allgemeine, the reviewer wrote, why did Mr. Baram gave voice to these crazy xenophobe settlers? Maybe because it was part of the project. And I think that basically, coming from this lack of knowledge, there is this imaginary solution to the conflict, an imaginary situation in the West Bank, which doesn't really exist. So for example, you go out to the West Bank and you're searching for the blocks of settlements that will not interfere with the Palestinian state. But there are no block of settlements. The settlements are almost everywhere. So I think that basically this lack of knowledge allows the European, with some of the Israeli progressive, to create a senseless zombie discussion of a zombie solution of something that will never happen, and I think we are past the historic time that it's still implementable. And I have zero interest in talking about solution that cannot be implementable.
Thank you for using the word zombie, because it's a very nice bridge to my second quote. And also thank you for offending the audience within 10 minutes. I think it's good to get over with this as soon as possible.
Why is it offending?
You know, you said that the Europeans don't know anything about the conflict and they have no really understanding of what's going on. Yeah. So I could imagine that at least some people in this audience would be offended. But
I think that, for example, just to make it...
No, there's nothing wrong with offending the audience.
When I come to Belgium, I don't try to explain to Belgium the nuance of the politics in Belgium.
Maybe that's what you should do.
It's too complicated. There's always this new right-wing party that is very strong, and then 2 years later it's another right-wing party. So I just don't, I can't follow.
Okay, back to the word zombie. Also still in your preface, you write, het publieke discours in Israël is doordrenkt van zombie-termen. Dat wil zeggen termen die in het publieke debat en in de media bestaan, maar die, als je over de wegen van de Westelijke Jordaan reist, de nederzettingen en de vluchtelingenkampen bezoekt of bij de checkpoint staat, op de koude grond geen enkele relevantie hebben. So the public discussion in Israel is basically it's filled with zombie terms, zombie words, meaning that there are terms that are being used in the political debate, in the media, but when you go, when you travel to the West Bank, when you visit the settlements or the refugee camps, or when you stand next to the checkpoints, all these terms, they don't have any relevance, they don't exist. So how come, why, if this is, I mean, now you're talking not about the Europeans who are clueless, but about your own people, the Israelis. basically you're saying they're clueless as well, because their media, their newspapers, their television stations, their radios are not informing them well.
There is not much difference between the idea of many people in Europe than the idea of many people in Tel Aviv about the conflict. It's the same ignorance. For example, every time I came back to Tel Aviv, people ask me, what do you think about the separate roads in the West Bank to Palestinians and Jews? There are no separate roads. There are one roads to Palestinians and Jews in the West Bank. They're traveling in the same roads all the time. And something...
Well, but there's some, if I'm not mistaken, after Oslo, there are some roads built to bypass.
Yeah, but any Palestinian can go there. It's supposed to help the settlers bypass Palestinian cities, but it's not unload to the Palestinians who drive them, and it does. Actually, it can create a very funny...
So there's no, just to get this thing straight, there are no roads on the West Bank forbidden for Palestinians?
No. And more than that, something funny Palestinian told me. For example, if there is a blockade by the IDF, and the soldier decide, because he has a bad mood, to stop any Palestinian car in order to make their life miserable, then the settlers that are standing in the same traffic jam will call his commander and tell him, oh, open the gate, let everyone pass. So it creates very peculiar situations in the West Bank. So this is one thing. Secondly, it's the lack of knowledge of who are the settlers. I mean, the settlers used to be religious right. But now, the main achievement of settlers movement is to bring the whole structure of the Israeli society to the settlements. Russian, Mizrahim, what we call Arab Jews, ultra-religious people that are not right-wing, they are not even Zionist, Ethiopian Jews. What it created a situation when the West Bank is imitating sociologically the Israeli state. And then the support in the settlers now coming from a totally different geographical and structural classes in the Israeli society that have relatives and have friends in the settlements. So to go to see the settlers as we saw them 30 years ago, just as fanatics religious, it would be ridiculous, because I think that 40% of the people who live in the settlers right now are not even religious and are not even right-wing. They came there because Israel built there a welfare society, which doesn't exist in Israel. And why is it important to understand it? It's part of the strengths of the settlers movement. And also, so this is another subject. We'll talk about 48, I'm sure.
We'll come later. But I think one of the achievements of your book is indeed that you show that there's not one type of settler, as there's no one type of Palestinian. A quote also you used in the beginning of your book by William Makepeace Thackeray, who traveled through this land many years ago. And back then he wrote, now I can write it directly in English, "Fear and blood, crime and punishment follow from page to page in frightful succession. There's not a spot at which you look, but some violent deed has been done there. Some massacre has been committed, some victim has been murdered, some idol has been worshipped with bloody and dreadful rites."
It's a good quote.
It's a good quote. But not many things have changed since then.
Also, what's really striking in the West Bank is if you drove in the roads, it's basically the most beautiful part of the whole land. And it's less populated with houses and tall buildings. It sometimes look like Provence. So part of the amazing experience of being there is when you're just driving there, before you get anywhere, before you get to your destination, you're under this illusion that this is like a very beautiful and even peaceful surroundings. But every time you get to a place, to a city, to a village, to a blockade, the first thing you see immediately is the totally different rules between Jews and Palestinians and all the mechanism of the IDF to control the West Bank. So I really found myself in some point in the journey just want to keep on driving and not getting to my destination, because it's really a sickening feeling to see how the bureaucratic mechanism apparatus of the occupation functions everywhere in the West Bank. And I think that one of the things that Israelis really don't totally understand is that the main problem in being a Palestinian in the West Bank, and this is different than inside Israel, is that every corner that you will find yourself, there is total difference of rights between a Palestinian and a Jewish. And this is something that it's across the board in everything. And this is something that it's very hard to see time after time again.
So basically, without you didn't use the word apartheid, but this comes close. So this is basically comes down to an apartheid system.
Well, I think that in the West Bank, Israel created, in many senses, kind of an apartheid regime. I would not say it about Israel. Also, in some parts of East Jerusalem, for example, think about the Palestinian Authority. So they have a Palestinian Authority. And there are different, in the West Bank, there is different areas. There is A, B, and C.
That's part of the Oslo.
Yeah, C is Israeli, is totally Israeli. B is Palestinian administrative and Israeli security, and A is Palestinian. But the IDF can arrest every Palestinian citizen, no matter if he lives in A, B, or C. So all the Palestinians in the West Bank are subjected to being arrested by
military law.
Yes, and this makes the Palestinian Authority totally unable to protect its own people, and it makes basically, when you must think of it, when you think about it, it makes the whole area under Israeli control.
Yeah.
In the minute that you can protect your citizens and they have no rights, and another country can kidnap them or arrest them, even if they are justifiably so, whatever, it means you have zero sovereignty. And many Palestinians are frustrated and hate the Palestinian Authority, first because they are corrupt and incompetent, but secondly, because it can't defend them.
No, but even more, I think if you go outside the city of Ramallah, most Palestinians will see the Palestinian Authority as a tool in the hands of the Israeli government.
Yes. In Israel, people attack Abu Mazen because he's like a terrorist, but Abu Mazen basically
He's helping the IDF.
The Palestinian Authority is collaborating with the IDF all the time, and the Palestinians sees it, and they don't understand why. But it's also because the Palestinian Authority need the Israeli institutions from different reasons: economical reason, political reason, and military reason. It needs their support. So basically, if you want to think about it, what is genius in the Oslo Agreement from the perspective of the Israeli right or soft right is that basically you brought the Palestinian Authority and you gave them a certain amount of land, but most of the West Bank is sea. Most of the West Bank right now, 60%, is under Israeli control. And then they agree to give you most of the West Bank and you can build their settlements. What before the Oslo Agreement, they could go to the Supreme Court and they are giving you a certain way of security. So I think that in this way it was very successful. I don't think it was planned. I don't think Yitzhak Rabin planned it. But this is what I think the mistake in Oslo Agreement, nobody there thought what will happen if there will be an Israeli government or a Palestinian government that doesn't want to implement it.
But I'm surprised that you're still talking about the Oslo agreements, because I thought that they died at least 60 years ago when the second Intifada began.
How can he die? I just told you that A, B, and C still totally existed. This is the idea of the Oslo Agreement. And Raja Shehadeh, who I quote in the book, who was a Palestinian advocate against settlements, the minute he saw the Oslo Agreement, he understood it's a historical mistake by the Palestinian Authority. I'm not saying that it's right, because they gave most of the West Bank to Israeli for the meantime. And I think that that people in Israel don't really appreciate the fact that the Palestinian really in the Oslo Agreement they were very generous to Israel when they accepted the Oslo Agreement. Not just Israel was generous for them. So basically, I think that what we have now is the death of the Oslo Agreement as a tool to create the end game of the solution, but it still exists in the all levels of the bureaucratic way that the West Bank is functioning.
Basically what you're saying, because of course this narrative that's quite popular also in the West, that Oslo died when Rabin was killed. But you are saying, no, Oslo was from the beginning a mistake and could not have worked, even when Rabin would not have been killed.
Look, my father was a minister in Rabin's government, and I have a huge respect to Yitzhak Rabin. But let's be honest about it. If Yitzhak Rabin would have gone to Camp David to negotiate with Arafat rather than Ehud Barak, I think he would go back to Israel after 2 days. Because Yitzhak Rabin will never agree to the concessions that Israel needed to do in order to create a Palestinian state. Never, ever. And when you create an agreement for the meantime, and you postponed all the important subjects to the end, but there is zero agreement about it, it's almost irresponsible. Because, for example, about Jerusalem, I don't think that Rabin will ever agree to give half of East Jerusalem to the Palestinians. Everything that Ehud Barak did in Camp David, I don't think Yitzhak Rabin would have done the same concessions. I think that people that...
I think Barak made more concessions.
Yeah, I think that people totally blame Barak, and I don't like Barak. But Barak in Camp David, if you think about the Israeli point of view, made a lot of concessions. If you think about the Israel, basically Barak failed, lost the elections because of the concessions. So I think that basically when the Israelis saw the Oslo agreement, nobody really prepared them to the concessions that they have to do in order to create a two-state solution, which means
that's a political failure.
Yeah, because and all the
of the Labour Party.
I mean, for example, there was this plan to create a Palestinian Jerusalem, that the capital of Palestine will be in East Jerusalem, but in Abu Dis. And Arafat went to Camp David and said, what do you mean? What Abu Dis? Temple Mountain, Har HaBayit, Al-Aqsa, which is everybody that knows the Palestinian discourse could have expected it. So I think that it's not about Barak, it's not about Rabin. It's the Israeli public was never prepared to it until the 2000.
Since you mentioned the former Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister Barak, I will jump to the end of the book because there you have a very nice quote about him, and then we can talk about 4867 because this also you mentioned it there. Maar dat is het punt niet, Joheid. In het bewustzijn van de Palestijnen die ik gesproken heb, is de oorlog van 48 het uitgangspunt voor iedere discussie over het conflict. Niet voor niks zei de voormalige Israëlische premier Ehud Barak na de mislukking van topoverleg in Camp David in 2000: ik kwam hier om over 1967 te praten en Arafat had over 1948. Dat is een doorslaggevende, misschien de meest betekenisvolle, dat is een doorslaggevende zin, misschien de meest betekenisvolle die Barak ooit heeft uitgesproken, die het fundamentele onbegrip tussen beide zijden weergeeft. But that's not the point. In the consciousness of the Palestinians to whom I have talked, the war of 48 is the essence, is the beginning of every discussion. And it's not 67. It's for good reasons that the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said after the disaster, after the failure of the negotiations in Camp David in 2000, quote, I came here to talk about the waters of 67 and Arafat just talked about 48, end of quote. That's a very important sentence, maybe the most important, the most meaningful sentence Barak ever uttered. There you go again, offending people, I like that. It's the most...
Why?
No,
Barak?
Yeah, anybody. I mean, people in Tel Aviv, Barak, anybody. I will finish my translation. The most fundamental, the most meaningful sentence Barak ever uttered, because this sentence basically makes clear the whole fundamental misunderstandings between the two sides.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the time, and this is an important subject in your book to talk about, because somewhere else in the beginning already you said one of the failures of the left-wing parties in Israeli government, in Israeli society, is that they keep on talking about 67, and they don't see that for the Palestinians it all started in 48.
Look, first of all, I want to say that I'm not want to talk in the name of the Palestinians, of course. I'm going to talk for my experience of talking with hundreds of Palestinians. The first meeting that was striking for me was in Balata, a refugee camp, 35,000 people, very crowded, very populated, people that was deported in 48. So I'm sitting with the head of the department, Ahmad Tukan, and I asked him, okay, Mr. Tukan, so give me your idea of the solution. Is Fatah, I think he's kind of moderate. He tells me, look, I don't care about the solution. I want to go back to the house that you robbed from my father near Kfar Saba in a village called Arab El Asawat. We had land. We grew up mandarins and oranges. We had a big house. My father was a very important person in Jaffa. You know what's Jaffa?
Yeah, of course. I
Not
guess people know. You mean the city south of Tel Aviv?
No. Jaffa is the big Arab district that was populated by 120,000 people that was existed before 48.
Before 48.
So it wasn't just Jaffa now.
And it was basically destructed in 48.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there were many villages, cities. It was the crown of the Palestinian existence. And so, and then he said to me, and I don't mind to be an Israeli citizen and serve in the army. So I told him, what about the two states? He told me, oh, we can do also two states. And I think that's what the first meeting. And then you talk to the Palestinians all the time, and you see that, first of all, many of them are deported from 48. Even in Ramallah, in Khan Yunis, in Hebron, many families are deported in 48. And also, I met a Palestinian in Chile. In Chile, there is a big community of Palestinians, 400,000 Palestinians, and in other places around the world. And what was striking for me is that the first thing the Palestinians talk about 48, because in 48, 700,000 Palestinians were deported. They lost everything, their house, their money, their status, their life, their communities. And basically, what happened to them, that they lost all their status in one day. And they were deported.
Well, one day, yeah.
One day, 1 month. And they were deported to many other places. And the Palestinian family was exploded like a grenade because of 48. So I met so many Palestinians that one brother is in Jordan, the other one is in Chile, the other one is in Saudi, in Qatar. Many families were totally broken. And this is something the Israelis just don't know. And what was so striking is...
Just don't know, that's interesting.
They don't know, for example, what I wrote about the Palestinian family, about the brothers, that I was really amazed to see how returning it all the time to hear that all the brothers are so far away of each other. And also, we are talk about refugees. So you think about the refugee with the key, living in Lebanon with the key of the house.
No, not necessarily.
Whatever.
I guess
so, but I was talking with, for example, with Jacques Nasser from Wabi. This guy is building the new Palestinian city called Wabi. Like totally bourgeois, rich, young, driving in this Land Rover, talks only in English with me. He's the marketing man of Wabi. And you ask him, so what's the solution? He tells me, I want to go back to Katamon, to my father's house, regardless of this. Now, I don't know if he really wants to go back. I think he doesn't. But this is part of the discussion. So to understand how much 48 is significant, this is the Palestinian trauma, not 67. And I think that the Europeans, the Israelis peace movement, and many other people are under this illusion that we can solve the conflict based on the 67 war, and I didn't see any signal to it. I would be even more blunt. I don't think that any Palestinian leader will sign an agreement without totally opening the question of 48. I'm not talking about that the whole refugees will come back, because I think it will totally change the Israeli state, but unless we'll open this discussion and talk about it in a very honest way.
But are you talking about the 48 borders?
No, I'm talking about the refugees.
Okay. So the big question, according to you, is the refugees.
Yeah, they asked me a question, for example, how much money do you think you owe me? One guy asked me, I had the house, we can talk about money, we can talk about what you owe me, we can talk about me coming back to the house. Now, I don't think that many Palestinian refugees will really come back, but we tried for 30 years to shove 48 under the rug and to live in this imaginary world when only 67 is significant. And this is something that doesn't have any merits on the ground. It doesn't exist. This is what I think. And I think that, for example, can I tell you a small story?
Yes, you can.
One day,
You're the guest of honor here.
I'm walking in the street, and I get a call from Ehud Olmert, that was the Israeli prime minister, now sitting in jail.
For corruption.
Yeah, but he's a nice guy. So
at least he didn't rape somebody like the former president.
That's right.
Yeah, so corruption is better than rape.
So he stole some money.
Yes. Yeah, he stole what's
so he tells me, look, I read the book and I was very impressed, and he started to argue with me about this. And he tells me, I don't agree with your assumption about 48. In 2007, I had a negotiation with Condi, Condoleezza Rice, and George Bush, and Abu Mazen, and I told Abu Mazen that the amount of refugees that will come back to the Israeli state is as the amount of Palestinians that can get into the Muqatta, which is like 5,000.
So you should explain the Muqatta.
Muqatta is the Palestinian Authority, the House and Offices of the Palestinian Authority, where Arafat was locked.
In Ramallah.
Yes. And I told him, and what did he say? So he agreed, he understood. So I asked him, and what happened then? So he said, and then I was arrested and fair. So I told him, but before you were arrested, didn't Abu Mazen disappeared? So he said, he did disappeared, but he just didn't answer the last proposal. And I think that basically Olmert was the bravest prime minister. When it comes to 67, almost Olmert went the whole 9 yards. I think that even if we leave 3% of the West Bank in Israel and give the Palestinians another 3%, it's not a big deal. We don't have to be fetishistic about the land so much. So when it comes to 67, he did everything. The only thing he didn't do...
67 is not a solution.
He's talking with Abu Mazen about 48, and I think it will start from the Israeli Prime Minister, tell the Palestinian people all around the world, because one mistake we are doing, we are talking to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. We forget that we have to talk to the Palestinians all around the world. That I think that he should tell them we should be honest about 48. One thing, by the way, I want to say about the Palestinians, they are not honest with themselves about why the Nakba happened. I didn't hear any Palestinians, they talk about the Nakba.
The Nakba is the catastrophe.
They talk about the Nakba, but they have to talk about the reasons that the 48 war began. And they don't talk about it. And this is part of the honest conversation.
So what are the reasons according to you?
They started the war. Israel accepted the resolution of the UN, and the Palestinians and Arab world didn't.
Okay, but also, before the independence, there were some guerrilla, there were some killings going on, there were some...
On both sides.
On both sides.
But I'm saying that in open discussion about 48, it's also to talk about what happened from the Palestinian side.
Okay, but basically...
But what I'm trying to say is that we, as a strong side, the first step is that the Israeli Prime Minister will ask the Palestinian people
for forgiveness.
Yes, and will say that this was a tragedy. The war was enforced on us. We didn't want the war. This is what he will say. But we deported 700,000 Palestinians, and I want to try to make it right.
And should the people, the Palestinians, be compensated with money as well?
I think that it have to be a solution that some of them will be able to return. Some of them that wants to stay in their house should get I forgot the word.
What's the word
you lost it?
No, I was no.
No, I mean it's a combination between
compensation.
Compensation.
That's what you were looking for. Okay, I thought that.
But the main thing is also symbolic. I think that we didn't listen to the Palestinians for a long time when they talk about 48. We thought it's just a maneuver to discuss 67, but I think it's very real. And and the right wing in Israel really love this argument because for them it shows that they were right.
There's no peace partner.
No peace partner. But I disagree. But I just think that we have to bring it into the table.
Let's speak a bit about the settlers. On page 42 you quote Dayan, a settler. And there he says, het is winnen of verliezen. Grond die niet van hen is van ons. En grond die niet van ons is van hen. It's winning or losing. Territory that doesn't belong to them belongs to us. And territory that doesn't belong to us belongs to them. So basically what this man is saying, and I think that many Israelis, even Israelis who happen to be not settlers, agree with him, is that it's a zero-sum game. It's winning or losing, and you cannot afford to be on the losing side.
Yes, and Danny Dayan is now the Israeli consul in New York, by the way.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, you should admit it.
I should, yes.
He's a smart guy. Basically, his argument is more honest than most of the settlers. He said, there are two narratives here. This is his argument. One is our narrative. We came back to our holy land after 3,000 years, and we have rights here because we were here and deported by the Roman. Okay. And the Palestinian argument is you're a colonialistic entity in the tradition of the West in the last hundreds of years. There is no difference between you and what the Belgians did in Congo, etc., etc. And his argument, between these two narratives, there is no peace. And I think that at least it's like an honest observation that I disagree with it. But he recognized the fact that this is a clash of narratives because of what happened in 48 and because of what happened in the occupation, that we cannot solve only by this maneuver to make 67. It's a much broader conflict. It has also religious aspects. It's not totally secular national conflict by now.
Let's go back for 1 second, because I think talking about Dayan is important. You said that the Israeli people, they really don't know enough. They don't accept the tragedy in 48. But isn't this also deep in the DNA of Zionism? Because one of the myths of Zionism, of course, was a land without people for people without a land. Yeah. And there were some people in the land. So how much alive is Zionism for you? I mean, having been to Israel a few times, you can talk to Israelis who declare themselves post-Zionist. There are Israelis who say, I'm not a Zionist anymore, I'm just an Israeli. I'm not even Israelis who declare I'm not a Jew anymore. So what does Zionism mean to you? I mean, it's a word that it's some discussion you seem to go. You don't want to go in with this book. You don't want to touch on it. But on the other hand, I mean, you're talking about it all the time. So what?
Well, yeah. Well, I think that historically Zionism had a very important role, which means that the Jewish people, because of historical facts, because of what happened in the 20th century, and we don't have to go over it, I think that the Jews needed a place for themselves. I think that anyone that will think about the 20th century will not conclude that one of the solutions, or the most prominent solution, should be that the Jews would have a place that they could feel safe and protect themselves, is lying to himself. But I think that Zionism meant to build a place for the Jews. This place exists. So I think that the new phase of the Israeli state is to create an equal society for the different demographic groups in the Israeli state. So I don't think that Zionism has any important role to play in Israel anymore, because I don't see, maybe after Trump, the American Jews would want to come.
I don't think so. They go to Canada,
yeah,
if anywhere. Yeah.
If they will want to come, we can maybe work something. But because there is no Jews that want really to come to Israel, so we have the Israeli state. Jewish people are living there, the one who wants. And now the challenge is to create an equal society for all the people, because there's one problem with the Israeli state, that if you ask a state belong to its citizens, right? Yeah. I mean, not really. It belongs to the rich people and to the powerful people, but essentially, theoretically,
to the citizens.
To the citizens, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You're very polite.
But I try to be polite.
But I didn't finish my point. Israel don't belong to its citizens. It belongs to the Jewish people, which means that Israel belongs to the Jewish people around the world, and don't belong to the whole citizens of Israel, which are Jews and Palestine, etc. And I think that this is a major problem, and I think the normalization of the Israeli state is to create a more Israeli state, which means a
less Jewish state.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be less Jewish state in the culture, in the tradition, in the rights, and in the superior rights of the Jews on the non-Jews. By the way, I'm talking just about inside Israel right now, in the 67 borders. I think that the challenge is to create an equal society. All the citizens will feel that this is their state.
Let's go back for 1 second, because you touched on it, to the history of Zionism. Would you say that without anti-Semitism in Europe, the Jewish people would have needed Zionism? In other words, is Zionism a result, basically a European problem?
Well,
if we call it a problem.
Yes, because you might say that the problems the Jews had in Arab countries part of it, or most of it in the 20th century came from Zionism.
Yeah.
Even though also in the 19th century there were some problems to the Jewish people in Arab states. But look, when Zionism began, most of the Jews in Europe totally rejected it, right? And
most of the Jews in Western Europe. In
Yes.
Eastern Europe, of course, many Jews supported it. And also, I mean...
no, but the biggest movement back at this time, the Bundes, was against Zionism. So when Zionism erupted, it was a crazy idea that was developed by a young...
Austrian Jew.
Young Austrian, no, but also young people that looked a bit crazy. And undoubtedly, if the historical circumstances would be totally different, I'm not sure that this idea would come to such greatness among the Jewish people in Europe. I don't know. I can't tell. I'm not a prophet in this sense. But of course, it was a combination between an idea that was hovering around people's minds for hundreds of years, and then a political group that made this idea possible, and historical circumstances that made this solution very reasonable.
Hannah Arendt wrote an interesting analysis about Zionism, and she claims that basically Zionism started among highly educated and assimilated Jews who felt, especially after the Dreyfus affair, that there was no future for them in Europe.
Of course, but this is exactly your question. Dreyfus affair, I guess that you ask anti-Semitic phenomenon, so Dreyfus affair is absolutely part of it. So I'm saying if you will forget the Dreyfus affair and the Holocaust and many other historical cases, so we will be in a different story. But you know, this is like saying that what would happen if the Second World War would never erupted. I don't think that what happened in the 20th century was accidental. So I think that Herzl and his friends understood something that's going on in Europe.
I ask it also because one, Ari Shavit, I'm not sure what's your opinion about him, but a famous Israeli journalist who wrote a book
He
about...
has some problems now.
Is he corrupt also?
I don't know about his problems.
No?
So I would mention it.
Tell me later.
Do Google.
I will, okay. Well, this
You're
book,
really disconnected.
because I don't know about the problems of Ari Shavit.
How many people here know about the problems of Ari Shavit?
Two people, okay.
No.
We will talk about it later.
See?
No, please. I mean, what are his problems? Tell it in one or two
No,
sentences.
I won't. It's.
But it doesn't matter. I think for what my
Let's
point...
say, okay,
my
in
point
one
is not-
sentence, he gave an interview to an American Jewish reporter,
Yes.
and
And he said he favors Trump.
what?
He said he's in favor of Donald Trump.
No, her argument was that he came on to her very strongly.
We are close to Donald Trump. That's any. But it doesn't matter for my point, because what in this book, which is an interesting book in my point of view, he says that Zionism was not only a reaction, in his point of view, to anti-Semitism in Europe, but it was needed in order to save the soul of the Jewish people. So I wanted to know what's your comment on it. Are you afraid of assimilation as well?
That's I think, in a way, look, if you think about German Jews like
I think about them often,
Mendelssohn
yes.
and other people, and Dreyfus himself, he didn't feel that he doesn't have an identity. Most of them felt that first and foremost they are German or French, etc., and then Jews. What happened to them is that Europe came to them and tell them, you're Jews, you're not German and not French. And I think that also many people in West Europe, in East Europe, it was a different story. But I'm not totally sure that the Jews in Europe in the 18th century felt a lack of identity, a lack of Jewish soul. I think that the Yiddish culture was an amazing culture, a prominent culture, an interesting culture. And the fact that if you think, for example, Mendel Mocher Sfarim, the first Israeli novelist, Yosef Shalom Avramovich, we call him Mendel Mocher Sfarim. His novel, The Travels of Benjamin III, was an amazing amalgamation between Cervantes and Jewish writer and Jewish tradition and Russian classics. So I think it was an amazing culture. I think that what Ari Shavit does is he judges the 18th century with conclusions of the 21st century. I don't think that he take under account the existence and the way the Jews live in Europe in the 18th century. So I kind of disagree.
Then we go back, because there's also connection to Dayan again. And speaking of soul, because this man says in your book, you quote him, the Gerut, in other words, the Gerut of Menachem Begin, one of the founders of the Likud Party, heeft de nederzettingen nooit bejubeld of via Messias gezocht, maar zag ze als politiek middel. Ik ben ervan overtuigd dat Israël een holle maatschappij wordt als het Hebron en Bet-El vrijwillig opgeeft. The Gerut of Menachem Begin has never been really in favor of the settlements or thought that this was a messianistic endeavor. But this party saw the settlements as a political tool. I'm convinced that Israel, and this is what I would like to ask a question about, that Israel will become a hollow society if Hebron and Bet-El will be given up voluntarily.
Yes.
Is Zionism becoming a new religion? I mean, you start this conversation by saying that the Israeli settlers, the settlement movement, basically managed to infiltrate all of Israeli society.
Yes.
Even many people in Tel Aviv are not aware of it. And now, one of the spokespersons of this movement is saying that it is needed because without it, Israel is a hollow society.
It's because Zionism became hollow. I mean, Zionism became like a great symbol that basically means nothing now. So the Labour Party says that Zionism, they take the economical part. They say Zionism was always for social welfare and equality and working class, etc. And now you took
Israel. To a certain degree, this is true. Of course, you have this socialist Zionist part of the movement.
Yes, but this is part of Zionism. Yeah. So they say this is Zionism, let's bring it back. The religious part said Zionism is, we are coming back to our old state to be in all the states. And from their perspective, so Hebron is part of it, right? So Hebron and Bet-El is part of it. And other people think that Zionism is a strong, I think most of the Israelis will think it's a strong, secure Israeli empire in the Middle East that cannot be defeated by the other forces. So there's no, and if you think about what Zionism should do right now, according to Zionism logic, is to bring many other Jews to Israel. That's what Zionism did. But it doesn't do it anymore because they are not needed anymore. So basically, because it's like an empty symbol, so you can throw on Zionism now everything you want. But really, if you think about it, classic Zionism has no real function in the Israeli society right now. Israel became economically, sociologically, and other...
And militarily.
What?
And also thanks to the military.
Yes, military, but Israel became, for example, a very Western society in a way, adopted part of the North American capitalist point of view. You cannot really see Zionism function in any really meaningful tool in Israel right now. It's a word that you use to say that my view is the real Zionism, and that's it. So I can tell you, we should create two-state solution. This is the real Zionism. It means nothing.
So you can put it's a label you can put on.
Yeah. So and this is the problem. So what Dani Dayan says, and by the way, Dani Dayan is not even religious; he's secular. So why is Hebron important for him? Why the Israeli society will be hollow?
Because for him, Zionism has become a religion almost.
Yes, but he's secular.
Yes, I know, but
so what's So he believes that to be in the West Bank is only important from a political point of view. Mm-hmm. So why is Hebron make for a secular? Why is a secular think that Hebron is the meaning of Zionism? I don't know. I don't think that he does. I think that this is something he says in order to justify the fact that he's sitting in the West Bank. But I really think that the religious part of the settlers, they are truly and really believe that the Israeli state is not as important as to come back to all the land. This is what they believe in. But Dani Dayan is a different kind of, Israel is more interesting. He's a kind of settler from political, militaristic, a strategic point of view.
We had a conversation in June in Tel Aviv and in a restaurant, and then you said that you believed that unlike other people, many other people who always claim that the status quo cannot go on, you said the status quo can go on for years, for decades. And you quote, there's a quote in this book also that you said that Israel managed to occupy the territories without paying a high price for it.
Yeah, I think this is what Grossman wrote in his book in the 80s, that if Israel will continue to occupy, it will be a weak and isolated state. Better watch from your predictions. So what really happened is that Israel became a very strong economical force, very strong military force, spreading its military and intelligence capabilities all around the world because of different reasons. Israel was managed to stop most of the international ideas or endeavors to stop the occupation. Netanyahu showed in the last 8 years that the US is totally incompetent in creating any meaningful process in the West Wing because of internal...
The US is totally incompetent. I repeat
What?
your words. No, just that people are listening carefully. The US is totally incompetent.
I mean, Netanyahu basically left...
Obama's government was totally incompetent in handling Netanyahu.
Of course.
Of
I mean,
course.
if you think about these 8 years, what really happened to Obama, that in 2010 Obama said, you know what, go to hell with your occupation and the conflict, I don't want to hear about it anymore, because he understood that he can't really deliver anything, because he doesn't have any force to make Israel to make concession because of American politics. So Netanyahu showed that in the 8 years of Obama, a progressive president that supported two-state solution, what Netanyahu did? He did nothing. He didn't do anything, didn't pay any price.
Well, you just told me he built a bit less settlements.
Yes, but he got from Obama the biggest military deal in the history of Israeli 6 months ago. After
that
he
was
went...
part of the deal with Iran, by the way. Of course, it was like...
No. The deal was Iran.
Yeah, of course, but because...
After he went to the Congress, behind the back of Obama, talked against Obama, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say, that if you look at the Middle East and everything that happened, Israel maintained the status quo without paying a lot of price. And if you want to be honest, for the foreseeable future, I don't see that no one will force Israel to change its policy. I just don't see it politically. There was a European thinking, an American thinking, that if you will solve the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, it will create waves of peace and prosperity in the Middle East.
Well, after we know that this is not going to happen. One quick
So
question about
it became like
BDS.
it became like a local thing now.
How big of a threat do you think is BDS? BDS, for the people who don't know, is boycott, divestment, sanctions.
Look, economically, from pragmatic point of view, I think that Israel all the time expand its dealings around the world. For example, Africa, that used to be very sympathized with the Palestinian cause for a long time because of the history of Africa, is now totally opened its borders for Israeli commerce. Netanyahu just visited. Many other countries need Israel security, data, etc., etc. And I had a friend that worked in the Israeli Treasury Ministry, and he said that if you look at Israeli economical dealing with the rest of the world, you don't see a decline, on the opposite. You see it raising all the time.
But also Israel is dealing with Arab countries with which it officially is at war.
Because of what happened in the Middle East, so Israel became closer to many other... What I'm saying is that the BDS could be an important tool. Could be an important tool, and it's a political important tool, but economically...
But it's not a danger. It's not
economically, I don't...
It's not changing anything.
No, I'm just saying, economically, it doesn't have the power to overcome I think the strength of the Israeli state and its allies around the world. And it could take time. Maybe the BDS could change the view of most of the people in Europe and the United States, and they will pressure the governments, etc., etc. But that's a process that will take a long, long time.
But basically, you're painting a picture of a situation that everybody, or the most important forces, are in favor of maintaining the status quo.
No, I didn't say
let me finish the question.
Okay.
And then you can... But in your book, there's still, well, the fragments of hope. So my question is, how can you imagine that the status quo is being changed if all the important forces are in favor of maintaining the status quo?
Look, it's not that they're in favor. You know, that I met a German politician that read a book, and he told me that he's against all my conclusion, and he supported a two-state solution.
Any politician in Europe supports officially.
So I told him, you support a two-state solution, so go do it. Let's see you. Now, because we don't do it, every day that passes make it less and less possible. But what I want to say that I believe, this is what I believe now. we made a mistake in the Israeli progressive part that we changed the discourse from the moral reasons to stop the occupation to the pragmatic reasons to stop the occupation. Because when we use the pragmatic reasons to stop the occupation, like the international community and the boycott and the UN and the economy, Netanyahu proved us wrong. And then we didn't have any argument. I think we should go back to the fundamentals of the problem, what the philosopher Yeshaya Leibovich talked about in the 80s and the 70s, that the occupation corrupt the Israeli society.
But do you believe if you look at the election results in Israel, you see that every election the people are voting more for right-wing parties than before?
Yes, it's because Netanyahu talked to their fears, and because they are being afraid, and because some of them have very good reason to be afraid. So we should also talk to their fears. We should not say to them,
we, the left.
Yeah,
what's left of the left?
Yeah, the left. We should not tell them you're idiot for being afraid.
But how many people are on the left in Israel? 50, 100?
Like, what do you mean? No, we're talking about.
No, seriously. I mean, even some of my friends there, they say it's so small. It's so.
The left in Israel.
The left in Israel.
I would say, let's say, 1 million people supporting this cause. The cause of stopping the occupation. It's quite a lot. And
but then there's again a paradox, because they talk about 67, and you made clear in your book and also in this conversation that the problem is not only 67. We should go back to 48. Who is willing to go back to 48 to say Al-Nakba was a catastrophe?
This is not 1 million people.
Okay, let's go back, because we are running out of time, and I would like to touch on a few other subjects. Here you're talking to a former member of Hamas, and you quote him again. This man is saying, de Joodse staat werd opgericht op het huis van mijn moeder, die in 1948 uit Lot immigreerde. Jullie zijn gediscrimineerd en het kwaad en de discriminatie hebben jullie afgewenteld op mijn familie en mijn volk. De politieke oplossing voor de Joden ligt niet hier. We moeten samen onderkennen dat de Joden terug moeten gaan en opgenomen worden in de landen waar ze vandaan gekomen zijn. In Frankrijk, Duitsland of Groot-Brittannië en natuurlijk Rusland. Again, my rough translation. The former Hamas man is saying, the Jewish state has been founded on my mother's house, who came in 48 from Lot, not far from the Israeli airport, Ben Gurion. You've been discriminated against, and the evil and the discrimination that you have endured, the result was that you discriminated my family and my people. The political solution for the Jews is not here. We have to realize together that the Jews have to go back and have to become citizens again of the countries where they came from, France, Germany, the UK, and of course Russia.
This was a funny conversation, because
very funny.
This guy, first of all, this guy, like many Hamas people, is very educated. He sat in jail for 15 years. I think he's made MA, maybe post-MA. He has like an amazing Hebrew, but not just that. He read all the Israeli intellectuals and all the Israeli writers, everywhere. He's going to the Hamas TV to explain Israeli culture, etc. And he told me, it was very interesting, he told me, look.
But you made also clear, but then you can feel that many Palestinians who went to Israeli prisons understand Zionism better than the Israelis.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure if it's of course, but it's interesting. To me, it's interesting. Go ahead.
But his argument is basically that there is no solution to the conflict right now, and the only solution is that all the Jews will go back to Europe without violence, because now he's against violence after he was involved in violence. So I told him, look, for example, most of my fathers and grandfathers came from Arab countries, so where should I go? So he said, you can go to Cyprus or something like this, which is not a bad place.
Not a bad place at all.
But what was interesting with him, it's that you see someone that is very decent and honest, and when you sit around him, you understand that if this will be the conversation, it's really the Jews or the Palestinians. Luckily,
here's the other side of the coin of what was Dayan was saying. It's their territory, it's ours, and
yeah.
But I want to touch on a more serious
but
note.
I'm just afraid
on diasporism. Do you believe diasporism can be a solution? Do you believe in a diaspora?
What do you mean?
Do you believe Jewish people living outside Israel?
If I believe it's the right?
Could it be a solution?
For
Can
me,
we imagine, I mean, if we take the famous Philip Roth novel, can you imagine the Jewish people leaving for one reason or another, leaving Israel and coming back to Europe?
no. Because, look, I really think that the Jews in the diaspora have their life as their identity, and I don't think it's a crisis of identity for a Jew who doesn't live in Israel. It's nonsense. Jews lived outside of Israel for thousands of years and created much more interesting culture than the one that Israeli produce right now, if we will be honest. But I'm an Israeli, and I live in Israel, and part of everything that connects to me is Israeli. And the specific amalgamation of Israeli Jewish culture in Israel is very unique to us and important to us, also the Hebrew, by the way, that most of you don't speak. So I write in Hebrew.
No.
So this is language.
It's one of the big achievements of Zionism,
Of course,
the Hebrew
it's
language.
a huge achievement of the
It's
time.
huge, yeah.
So I'm saying that for me, it's not a solution. But what I'm afraid is that this view that he's stating, and also some settlers stating, that one of the ideas of the settlers of Sar Eliash, that you said, we will deport many Palestinians of the West Bank, and the people that loyal to us will get citizenship. These radical views from both sides, I think, are getting stronger all the time. And we don't have a lot of time, I believe, to bring the I would say the normal forces that want to create equal rights between the two people.
So we are running out of time.
You said it before.
We are running, I have to look, we are running out of time.
We
But have,
can.
I
I have a flight in the morning, so I can go
I
now
know.
if you want.
Oh no, we're running, yep. Almost, okay. A quote by Elisha, a settler, because you touched also on the question of religious war. You ask him, what about the rights of the Palestinians? And then he answers, ze hebben rechten onder onze heerschappij. Ze kunnen aanspraak maken op mensenrechten, maar niet op burgerrechten. Ze mogen niet stemmen. Idealiter zijn ze hier helemaal niet. Jullie begrijpen niet dat het een godsdienstoorlog is. Dat is het punt. Alle oorlogen ter wereld zijn godsdienstoorlogen. So how about the rights of the Palestinians? And then this young settler says, they have rights under our law. They cannot apply. They're not entitled. They're entitled to human rights, but not to civilian rights. They cannot vote, and in an ideal world, they would not be here. You don't understand that this is a religious war. That's the point. All wars are religious wars. Is the conflict when is this where the conflict boils down to a religious war?
It has a religious aspect that we cannot overlook anymore. I think part of the ideas that I show in the book of religious conversation and mutual prayers between Muslims and Jews are very, very important. The religious dialogue that are going on in the West Bank and in Israel is very, very important. But also I have to say that you didn't quote the other side of the settlers that I show, and it's important for me to say it. For example, the Otniel Yeshiva. So the Otniel Yeshiva is a very open yeshiva that, many yeshivas are very close and restrict and totally denounce the secular world. And Otniel Yeshiva is a combination between the secular world.
You didn't give me time to do that, but I have
okay, I just want to say that in Otniel you see many people.
Like Rabbi Froman is like one of them, and
yes.
the Judo movement. It's a movement, no?
Yeah.
Judo. Can you explain the Judo, because I found it very interesting and we're really running out of time. Can you explain it?
Judo just there is a place called the field when Palestinian settlers are working together and building together a movement. But what I want to say about the settlers, that in the fragment of the settlers, there is a movement of people that wants to stay in the West Bank and are willing to pay the price. And the price is very simple for them. The price is one equal state for everyone. So in the settlers,
with same rights.
Totally. In the settlers, it's a small group, but in the settlers, because they are more open to the world and they started to understand how the world look at them, and the settlers, it's very important for them to be morally right. They are talking about moral all the time. So some of them, in the fragments of the settlers, you can see people that say, we understand that if we want to stay here, we have two options, apartheid or one state, and we support in one state. And if the settlers truly and honestly support one state solution, equal rights to everyone, I don't have any problem with him.
I'd like to end my part of the questions with a quote in an interview you gave to The Guardian about your novel, Good People. And there you are saying this: "Those of us who live in capitalist societies often go out and work for corporations that contradict our political ideas. And then we come home and rant on Facebook or go out to a protest. In Israel, it's very interesting how many people can function while working for organizations that totally contradict their personal beliefs. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, just to observe that literature can try to understand what it means psychologically, how we can go out into the world and live within a society that we may consider to be unjust. It must involve a level of personal denial. In every case of genocide, you have a small group of people who actually commit the atrocities and a great many other people who are greasing the genocide machine." I'm not implying that there is a genocide machine in Israel, but you get my point.
Do I?
I hope so.
You want to talk about capitalism? Because I have a lot of
No,
to
I
say
want
about
I
it.
want to talk about how you can have.
I really understand capitalism, by the way.
Let's please not tonight about capitalism. Another night. I want to talk about that you have your personal beliefs, you have your ideals, and you live in a society and you work for a society that totally contradicts these beliefs and ideals.
Yeah. Well,
And what does it do to you?
we can
Is
talk
this-
about it in two levels. I meant first of all for the corporations guys, but in Israel there is this thing that many people that totally object to occupation are working in high-tech companies. Many high-tech companies basically give all their brilliant minds to many new methods to make the occupation much more sophisticated. So they're working in high-tech companies, in the intelligence force, in the intelligence army, in different spheres of the government, and in the morning, basically what they do is they are working for the occupation, apparatus of the occupation, even though they totally object, it totally contradict the political view. And then in the evening, if they're allowed to, they're writing
on social media and
they are giving they're writing a post and posting articles against the occupation. I think that this is a very interesting phenomenon in Israel, in the West in general, but in this specific case, it created this lack of connection between your occupation and your political and ethical ideas. And I think that this is a phenomenon that created this
schizophrenia.
non-political political entity.
Can you be a member of the Israeli army and protest the occupation?
Well,
And
I think that you can. I think that it depends what you do. In the army I was a secretary, so I didn't really support the occupation. But I think that the army is one thing because it's something you do in a very early age, and the pressure that you are under to go to the army when you are 18 is very, very strong from all corners of society. But I think that general, as an adult, I saw many of my friends and my colleagues really work in, there's no other way to say it, really work to enforce the occupation. Even, for example, they are working in order to make other people in the world that object the occupation accept the occupation. So they have many routes to do it. And sometimes I feel frustrated because of it, because I understand that basically you cannot really create a strong political movement when many of your supporters or allies are basically working for this apparatus. But this is also a structural problem of capitalism, of the movement against
no capitalism tonight, I said. Okay, I guess this is the moment to open the discussion to the public. As I said before, really questions. Somebody's walking around with a mic. I see a hand there. Wait for the mic and please mention also your name. Let's try to be a bit polite.
Hi, my name is Mauricio. My question is, after the First World War, during the British Protectorate, Menachem Begin was organizing some bombings, and later he became the president, and he signed
the prime minister.
Sorry, the prime minister, and he signed the peace with Egypt. How do they see Menachem Begin now as a hero when he was putting bombs against the occupation back then? And second question, very briefly, within the Likud party, the president, this is what I wanted to say, Reuven Rivlin, he's changing his belief from the mainstream Likud party, which is, I think he wants a one-state solution where the Palestinians have more rights. So do you agree with what Rivlin is proposing?
Well, for the first question, Menachem Begin was the head of the Etzel, and to be quite honest, Menachem Begin didn't really understand as the leader of. I just know it because I was the editor of his biography. So he wasn't really involved in the military decision of the Etzel because he didn't really understand of it. But undoubtedly, the Etzel was responsible for the bomb in the King David Hotel that killed dozens of people. So I think that Menachem Begin made a huge change in his policies, in his political beliefs, and later became prime minister and made a peace with Egypt. And I think it's an interesting political development. Like Arafat, for example, you could see from the other side, in the end of the line, he made the peace, tried to make the peace with Israel and settle, so it's not uncommon. For the other question, I didn't talk about it with Arnon, that I'm part of a movement that I will not get into it right now, but it's called the One Land, Two States, that believe that there is one land and you can't really separate it, because you cannot really create separation. You cannot, for example, separate East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem with a wall. It's a totally ridiculous idea. If you are in Jerusalem a lot, you know that Jerusalem cannot be separated anymore. Also because many Palestinians from East Jerusalem are working and living in West Jerusalem. So to put a wall in the middle of Jerusalem is a crazy idea. So I think that our movement believes in two sovereign states that live in kind of a confederacy that allows any Palestinian citizen to have resident right in the Israeli state and vice versa. And I think that this is like a more flexible idea that could be much more implementable because you don't have to take out everyone from its house, and you give some answer to the refugees and also to the Palestinian who wants to move in the whole land. Reuven Rivlin is a good example for someone from the Likud that doesn't want the Jews to let go of Hebron and Bethel, etc., but understand that if he wants to stay there, the only logical solution is one state right now. But one state is also a dangerous idea. I fear that it will could create a demographical battle between the Palestinians and the Jews until someone will win and then will oppress the other side.
But the battle is already going on.
Yes. So I believe that our solution, which is Palestinian-Israeli grassroots, is more interesting than what Rivlin suggested in this political stage.
We go to the next question. The gentleman over there. Yeah, wait for the mic and mention your name, please.
Good evening. My name is Adi. My question is, how did Nir Baram become politically awake? Was it because he's the son of a member of parliament, or is it the army? Was it something post-army? I mean, you are working for Haaretz newspaper. I mean, what made you become politically left-winger, or at least politically human rights conscientious?
Well, my family was always involved in politics. So we talked about politics all the time in dinners and Friday. If in Friday we don't talk about politics, we have nothing to talk about. So the silence is much more scary than everything. But in some point, I think that I really looked at the Labour Party, that my father and my grandfather were part of it, as something that I cannot support and believe anymore in their policies and their ideas, and I think the superficial understanding of the nature of the conflict. And I went to look for different political houses that I didn't really find, especially after this book. But anyone who lives in Israel and understands what's going on and honest with himself about the state that I want to live in and the state that I want to be in and how I want to live in an equal society that doesn't oppress the other side will get some of these ideas. So it was very natural for me. I think it became much more complicated when I understood that the idea that I supported for a long time, the two-state solution, the classical two-state solution, and I still support it in general, but when I understood that it's really, I believe, not implementable anymore and doesn't have any merits in reality right now, I think that everything became much more complicated for me.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Oh, what a! My expectations were so different. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Isabel. Could you give us a bit of an explanation of your confederal vision, because that was not really clear. You were quite short on it.
basically the idea is that we cannot really create separation between the two states. They are too much together in the West Bank, in Jerusalem. And also the question is why to separate everywhere? For example, when we try to build a wall in Jerusalem and through Palestinian neighborhood outside the wall, we created no man's land, horrible neighborhoods because nobody took care of them. So the wall is not a solution for everything. And so the idea is, let's not try to separate with the wall or with the fence in places that it's very hard to separate. Let's think about the land as one land for everyone, with total freedom of movement to everyone, like, by the way, it was before 87, before the first Intifada. Any Palestinian could go to Tel Aviv and vice versa. But we want to give people the ability to express their national beliefs, so we will do the two-state solution, but only in a confederacy that will allow all the people to be the people of the confederacy and also of one of the states. So it means that if you're a Palestinian, you can live in Israel as a resident, and if you're an Israeli, you can live in Palestine as a resident. This is what many settlers will have to do. And the good idea here is nobody has to leave his house. You can implement it in phases right now. Secondly, there is freedom of movement to everyone, and the green line is not really important in the movement anymore. And thirdly, you don't try to separate in places that it's impossible to separate. And you think about the landscape and the land in a different way. And I think that this is the kind of flexible solution that we are going to. Because when I was in Jerusalem, I suddenly understood, you go in this road, this is East Jerusalem and this is West Jerusalem. It's 5 steps. So no one can really separate Jerusalem. And I was in West Jerusalem just the other week. You hear Arabic all the time in West Jerusalem, the Jewish Jerusalem. So why create this wall and not letting the people from East Jerusalem work and also be in West Jerusalem? Jerusalem should be one Israeli Arab city for everyone.
But would you have 2 parliaments?
Yeah, I mean, it will be the Palestinian capital and the Israeli capital. But you will not try to create separation in Jerusalem, but you
have the same laws.
Yes, but you have the same laws. And also, if you go in Jerusalem and you try to imagine where you put the wall, I think it's impossible to think about it. I think it also will destroy the east of Jerusalem economical situation. And I think that Jerusalem, by the way, I want to say something about Jerusalem. Jerusalem now, to a certain extent, is working. It's working. If you go to West Jerusalem, you see Palestinian everywhere, working, living, sitting in cafe, goes to cinemas. So the model of Jerusalem, even though the mayor of Jerusalem is not supporting it, but life in Jerusalem, the Arab Jews in Jerusalem, it's not like my paradise, but it's starting, it's working in a way.
Would we get the same answer if we would ask this question to Palestinians in East Jerusalem?
That if he wants to...
If it's working model for them.
I didn't say that it's the best solution. I think that if you will ask Palestinians in East Jerusalem, he will tell you, like in the book, that he feels discriminated, etc., etc. But if you ask him, do you want to totally separate East and West with the wall, that each side will live only there? I don't think that this is what I didn't hear this is what they want. I think that Jews and Palestinians in this land will not be totally separated, and every idea that tries to think about it in this way will fail.
So basically destiny forced them to live together. That's what you're saying.
They are living together now.
To a certain degree. One last question and then, yes, madam. Are we waiting for the mic? Yeah, one sec, the mic is coming.
My name is Imke, and I would like to know what you think about these European NGOs or also American NGOs who work in Israel and Palestine and think that they are neutral, and have often been criticized for being very one-sided. What do you think about them? Do you think it's useful what they are doing?
Which one?
All kind of peace NGOs, like this economical one called EAPI, which has been very criticized by some people. Do you think that they should play any role, or that it's not useful?
I think that what happened in Israel, and this is very interesting, is that we used to have a very strong left-wing movement, political movement, that shattered into 250 NGOs. And this is a tragic affair, because when you take all the NGOs, so everyone has a very good goal, but he has a very narrow, this one wants to make Jerusalem whatever, and this guy working in Hebron. So every NGO has a very noble cause, but all the important and young people are going to work for these NGOs. And then suddenly what happened in Israel, and I really try to fight it, but I can't. It's the opposition in Israel right now is to the occupation based on NGOs. They are the one who goes to TV, they are the one who talk, and what we need is a political, because the NGOs, they don't really care about what the Israeli opinion, what the Israeli public will think about them. They have their goals. So the fact that we like, how do you in capitalism when you were like, no, not sublet. Like
in capitalism, what do we do in capitalism?
No, I mean like.
You really want to talk about capitalism?
Like when I forgot the word. When you take a factory, the privatization of the politics of the left movement from the parties and the peace movement to the NGOs, I think it destroyed the Israeli left. And so this is why I'm I really admire them and I help them and I always willing to help them. But I think it's a tragic situation right now.
The last question, short question, I will ask you a prediction. When is the status quo coming to an end? 2025? 2030?
I think
35?
It depends on Donald Trump.
It depends on Donald Trump. Nir, you wrote a very insightful book, and I hope people are going to buy it. I didn't mention your novels. Please buy the novels as well. They're great. They're extremely interesting. We will talk about another time when you finish your book about your mother. Also, Nir, I want to tell you, you managed to offend first the Europeans, then the people in Tel Aviv, then the moderator, then the audience here.
The moderator?
You offended me also, but it doesn't matter.
Why?
Because why? You have mentioned the name Ari Shavit. You remember what I said? You're really not up to date. I have the memory of an elephant. I have the memory of an elephant, but I will take revenge.
Okay, so I just wanted, let me just to thank you for your great reading and great question and your time, and say that everything I said was, from a certain mood that could change if we do it in another one.
What I wanted to say was, and that's also not a lesson, but what I want to say to the audience, that you managed to offend all of us in such a charming way. So this is one of the lessons you should take home. If you have to offend people, and I think all of us have to offend people sometime, think of me.
By the way, I heard
that
you offend people sometimes, right?
Only on Sundays. Nir, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.